All right. So, while there's been some growing pains around here, we are really grateful for the opportunity that this presents to allow more neighbors to participate even when they can't be here in person. Do I need to turn my mic?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
We can hear you from the
People online, let us know if you've got audio. All right, next slide, please. So there's a whole lot going on. Since our last public meeting in July, we have a lot of things to catch you up on. So we're going to jump right into it. There has been an announcement of the winning bid for 1769 West Pershing in the Central Manufacturing District. Yes. We have some updates on the Damon Silos demolition, as well as updates of action on 35th Street. We have some announcements regarding our bicycle project along the riverfront. New pickleball courts are coming to the neighborhood, and also a development in back of the yards that will affect McKinley Park. So we're going to talk about all of that before we get to our guest speaker. So I'm going to take a minute to introduce Nick from Urban Rivers, who's here to talk to us about what Urban Rivers does in general, and also in particular about the restoration work that they are undertaking on both. And then we'll have our usual wrap up stuff with some upcoming opportunities and events. Slide, please. All right, so Pershing, guys, it's been a whole year since the city announced that they were going to sell this building, and they have finally chosen a winner. They have chosen the mixed-use housing and commercial developments proposed by Epstein and IBT, which was an overwhelming favorite in public comment. Yay! So I want to thank. I feel like this is a real triumph for the neighborhood, because over 200 people showed up for this public meeting to say what they wanted and shared their opinions, and the city really did take all of that into account in the way that they're working this. So for those of you who weren't a part of that, this is the easternmost building of the 3 red brick giants on Pershing, formerly home to CPS. So the first thing that our new owner has to do is clean out 30+ years of CPS crap. It was actually so bad, they didn't show the building they're selling. They showed the building next door and said, okay, everybody, the floor plates are the same. So I asked them today when the yard sale is going to be. They keep us posted. But we are really, really excited about it. The plan as proposed was 120 units of housing. One side of the building, which as you're looking at it, this side would be housing and the other side would be commercial. I want to point out that this is as proposed over a year ago. And that's important, because what happens next is that they're going to get into negotiations with the city about the details, and some of these things may change. So, for example, in my conversation today with the designer, he asked me if the neighbors would be okay if the whole thing was residential, because the market for office space has really changed in the last year. And he said, that's a conversation that we could have, and people would probably be interested. On the other hand, this is in an ETOD zone where ground floor commercial is required. And we talked about some possibilities for what might come of that. So I want to be really, really clear that, would like me to unmute, okay?
Stay muted, stay muted, okay. Here, I will just turn.
All right, so want to be really clear that this is actually the first conversation we've had since bids went in, because we were part of reviewing those bids. We were not allowed to talk to anybody who was involved for this whole last year, which has actually made it complicated, because Epstein is so big that they wanted to work with us on other projects in the neighborhood, and we had to say, sorry, I can't talk to you. So we're also grateful that that's over. So what happens next? Thank you. Okay. That's fun. I'm gonna let Eladio figure that out. What happens next is a couple of things. So it has been a whole year since this thing was proposed, and some things have changed. So they're actually, oh geez, we got the bid and now we have to get our act together. So there will be public meetings. But the first thing that's going to happen is that the developer team actually needs to get into the building they're buying, which they haven't even bid in yet. And that will happen next week on October 2nd. All right, so I guess 2 weeks on October 2nd. And after that, there's a bunch of paperwork and some further negotiations with the city. There will be public meetings organized by DPD, because this is the sale of city properties treated very different than a development on private property. And because of that, the city really does want to hear more from neighbors. There will be more public meetings about design. Also, because of the size of this development, it's gonna go through a planned development process, which requires, regardless of who the developer is, or public or private, also requires several public meetings about design elements. So, for those of you who've got concerns about what may or may not be going in here, there will be plenty of opportunity to voice them. Epstein is also gonna be our speaker at the October public meeting. They want to set realistic expectations about that because they'll just be starting to talk with the city and more in depth, so they're not going to have a firm plan. But we talked about maybe they could show us some about the existing conditions and some of the things that they are thinking about and get comments from neighbors within that context. I also want to point out that because this is a city property, we've had a couple of inquiries about negotiating a CBA. Community benefits agreement. So that is a possibility. However, because this is a city-owned property, a lot of the things that would typically be negotiated in a CBA are going to be done for us by the city. So the hot topics that we've already said we want to address are what are rental rates going to be like? We want to make sure that rents are going to be appropriate to McKinley Park and not other areas of the city. What will public access look like for the green roof? And what is going to happen with this proposed grocery store? There in the previous public meeting, there was hinting at that it might be another form of retail, which isn't necessarily bad. But again, you want whatever goes in there to be culturally and economically appropriate to the neighborhood. So not a Shop and Save, not a Whole Foods, something in the middle, preferably something that's at, that would maybe an Asian grocery or something where you'd have booths for neighborhood vendors to set up, like there's options. And so those are some of the kind of things that we can express to DPD that we would like to negotiate for. And then if DPD's solution is not satisfactory, we can pursue a separate CBA. The questions on any of that?
That's a question.
Yeah.
How does that happen? Who decides like Whole Foods versus Aldi's versus Pink, right?
Yeah, this would be a good solution, right? The answer is the owner. However, public opinion matters, right? And it's not in their best interest to sue something that isn't appropriate to the neighborhood because it's not likely to succeed economically and they care about that. So if something's too expensive or something that people don't want, they're not going to shop there and then their tenant feels. So it is in their best interest to get it right. But it is ultimately up to the owner who's going to sign a lease on that building. Other questions? Yeah.
The city would be negotiating for these things on our behalf. What does that process look like?
Yeah, so DPD, the city of Chicago, is selling this building to a developer. And they would include certain terms as part of the sale. In other words, in order to buy this building, you must do the following. And so that's how that process is going to be handled mechanically. And then opportunity for neighbors to comment will go through DPD, through their public meetings, and also directly through the developer. They said we'll be providing the first opportunity for comment at this meeting next month.
Question, you might have already touched on it, apologies. Next steps in terms of the approval, we know that we lost that 120 unit development last year. Didn't clear the housing committee, didn't even make it to zoning. I forget which committee.
Are you talking about the one that was next to the asphalt plant?
Yeah. Because of the proximity to that same deal, what are the steps in terms of once it gets to City Hall, if it needs to go to City Hall? That might include getting, the community to contact the members of that committee and just, share with them whether we really want this to go through or if there's particulars that we as a community want to see them discuss in that public forum.
Sure. CDPH has already signed this. They were part of the final meeting that happened on May 4th, and they said, go. One of the criteria for that was that this is several blocks further away from the asphalt plant than the other development.
Still needs to clear a committee vote in city council, correct? Either for zoning or for.
That is a question for DPD.
Okay.
I don't know yet.
Okay.
But I will say that this got hung up for so long because partly because of the mayoral transition, just to be clear, like the decision meeting was held on May 4th, and then there was a new mayor on May 15th, so some things got lost in the shuffle. And about a month ago, we wrote the mayor a very polite letter that says, hey, you might have lost this in the transition, but by the way, where's our housing? And we got it in on this happened about 3 weeks after that, so that's good that they're paying attention, but yeah, it's true that there's some things that are shuffled, and there's stuff on the DPV website about how it's gonna work with zoning. I don't have it in my head. Anybody else? All right. All right, let's move on.
We have a
oh,
question
yeah, sure.
here. Is it possible to open the existing building for community tours? Would it be unsafe?
They don't have the owner.
The owners are getting restricted access. Everybody had to sign a waiver, and it's steel toes and hard hats.
So the answer is yes, it would be unsafe.
There's a definitely unsafe. However, when I talked to Epstein today, they did agree to ask for somebody from our organization to go on that tour and see what they say. Okay, Damon silos. So the Damon silos are slated for demolition. The permits have not been granted. We hear about that. There was a public meeting in August for about 100 neighbors, and a number of partner organizations attended, and I think more than 40 people spoke, including several of you. So thank you to everybody who came out for that. The 12th ward has taken action to slow down this process a little bit, to make sure that there are lines of communications in process, to make sure that neighbors are well informed. The city is going to set up a sub website specific to this issue, to make sure that neighbors are getting continuous information. For example, if the demolition goes forward, there's going to be air quality information and things like that from monitors on site that the city will make an effort to share. The broad overview here, the city process will issue, there's 2 processes for permitting happening here. The city process will issue a permit for each of the 5 buildings on this site, and they may not come through. They may come through all at once. They may come through one at a time. So that's one thing that's happening. There's also a federal Army Corps process that will issue a single permit for the site. However, the site that Army Corps has jurisdiction over is not the entire site. So, because their jurisdiction comes up to the water line, which goes inside the red brick building, one of the 5, but they are negotiating historical. It's not really preservation. They're not talking about leaving big chunks of the building, unfortunately, but they are talking about some kind of mitigation of historical damages that would apply to the entire site. And on this point, guys, just say we have really, really tried everything. Next slide, please. We have really tried everything on this one. We were able to secure a volunteer to do a full structural analysis of the site. We were not able to get the owner's permission for sufficient access to conduct that full analysis. He will not allow anyone to go inside the silos, even though several of us have been in there with permission, not under cover of darkness. We proposed subdividing lot, and that someone else could take the slice with the silos and therefore solve the owner's liability problem by making it someone else's problem. The drawings that you see in front of you are pro bono work from Skidmore, Owings, Merrill, to show 3 different ways that the lot could be subdivided to accomplish that goal. That conversation, Matt did take the meeting. It wasn't, in the end, the buyer didn't feel like they had a partner to negotiate with. The only thing I see that possibly could come with that DPD, and I think we are on the same page, that as much as we'd like to see the silos remain standing, it's more important to get a community asset on this site. And there is still some hope of that in the long run. Eladio is going to talk to you about some of the work we're doing with bicycle infrastructure on that will include that site along the river, and there's reasons why that's required. It's not a gift from that asphalt, but we will get something. There's also been some murmurings at City Hall about the possibility that at a later date, the city might still want part of this site for public green space, but they are not going to take on the liability of the silos themselves. One of the things that makes this issue especially complicated is that the Commissioner of Buildings, who is ultimately responsible for the demolition process, formerly worked for CMS, which is the state agency that done us wrong in the way that they sold this property. And in fact, the same individual who will make the decision about the demolition process tried to sell this property in 2008, and he's convinced it's a loser. And on the one hand, like, hey guys, that was 2008. It wasn't a good time to sell anything. And that's just the reality. And I would point out, he's an attorney, he's not an engineer, he's not an architect, but his take on the safety value, the safety of the silos was, yeah, I went in there once and I'll never do it again. And he's entitled to his opinion, and his opinion counts because he is the Commissioner of Buildings. But we would have really loved the opportunity to get that from an engineer so that the community can have a more thorough understanding of what is not possible. And we're just not going to be able to do that with the level of cooperation from this. So, stay tuned. We will let you know as things go forward. N4EJ and Southwest Environmental Alliance, several of the other environmental groups are really keeping tabs on this from that aspect. And so we also invite you to connect with them for further updates about what to look out for regulations. Questions? 35th Street. So another big public meeting that we had in August, and a much happier one in this room. We had about 50 neighbors who showed up to talk about revitalizing 35th Street. The 11th and 12th wards are working together for an upzoning proposal that would allow those vacant storefronts to open. So I want to be clear that revitalizing 35th Street is a really big project. And while zoning might sound scary, this is actually the easy part. Is first to allow businesses to make it legally possible to open a business. And then we have to deal with the shape that these storefronts are in and which businesses might move into. But it was a pretty good public meeting. We had about 50 people who came and generally positive feedback, and people had questions that you might expect, like what will this do to my property taxes? Perfectly reasonable. What happens to existing homeowners? Don't worry, everything's fine. And what kinds of businesses will be allowed. And that is going to depend a little bit on the details of the zoning. So what the wards are leaning towards, and Sabrina, if you want to say anything else about this, let me know. What the wards are leaning towards is B3-2. So what that means in English, B3 means that the default is that the ground floor must be commercial, not either or. However, if someone is currently living in that ground floor, they can stay and it's not a problem. All right, so for anything new, the ground floor must be commercial. And the -2 means that the height limit generally supports a 2 flat, but there might be some 3 flats. Right, so that's what that means in English. One of the things is a B3 designation does allow a license to serve alcohol. It allows a sit-down bar. But that is still requires an additional use permit. So it's not like anybody can just run in and set up shop. There will still be additional permitting required for that. So we're not going to have a whole strip of bars by default. But it would allow more restaurants like Chile Floriano, which currently has what's called a spot zone. It's the only building there that has a designation that allows them to serve. So, some of the things that we have thought about that we would like to see move in are things like, we don't have a bicycle shop, we don't have a veterinarian. It'd be nice to have more than one place you can sit down and have a drink with friends. So those are the kind of things we're talking about. True neighborhood businesses, ideally owned by people from the neighborhood, but definitely serving the basic needs. The wards are hoping to put forward an actual ordinance before Thanksgiving, and then we'll see what happens from there. Questions on this one? And now,
Great picture.
ooh, right,
It's just right.
what can I do for you?
The older women had promised another community meeting. Did you? I'm sorry, did I miss that? Is there?
Yes, there has been discussion of another community meeting. We don't have a date. I heard next couple of weeks.
We have to figure out what the.
There was a little bit of a delay because the entire 11 Port office got taken out by COVID and they lost like a couple weeks of work. So that, you can't do anything about it.
Okay.
I have a question, is
Yeah.
the 35th one the same as the one in front of the New Archer restaurant?
No, and that's an excellent question. So, New Archview, so there's a liquor moratorium for the entire neighborhood, except for the 2 blocks from the Cermak Fresh Market down to New Archview. Yeah, and that's a separate matter from zoning. But yes, they also have to have the zoning. So Archer is zoned differently than 35th. Okay, can Harris, Come on up. So, for those of you who have not got the news, I want to introduce all of you to the McKinley Park Development Council's first employee. Neighbor Larry. Who is working with us on the South Branch Connectivity Project, which is going to look at bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure from Western all the way to Chinatown. And I'm gonna let you have a few words
Yeah,
here.
so I'll go to the next slide, so you guys can just look at me. But yes, so the project is to create a framework. For connecting the different separate parks that run from Hinton Park all the way to the Western Lunch. So it's a year-long project where we're going to assess the current conditions, figure out who owns all the property along the riverfront, start reaching out to them, and make plans for what we would do when the city decides to give us money, or we get some grants to build more parks, or to start figuring out how to connect them all. So we're currently wrapping up the phase of collecting info, which is assessing the current conditions, making a list of all the property owners, and then we're gonna start reaching out to them and figuring out how to get across big streets, how to connect all the current parks. Big one would be Halston, right? It's police report showed that's the intersection with the most accidents. So figuring out the way to get people from one side to the other on bikes or walking is a big priority. Same thing with Western, we got to go across. You would have to go across about 7 lanes to get from the boat launch that's there to the trail that we would build in the future. Same thing, connecting the top part to anything by railroads. And so, do we go over the river? Do we build a 4-story bridge? That's the kind of stuff that we'll have to figure out and make plans for. And so, like I said, you guys make a framework, get drawings ready and set to go, so that when we get money to actually build the things, we say we have a plan. So when you people, you're all feedback for when we start reaching out to you to see what we or you all want in these spaces. Do you want a bridge under the bridge? Do we want a bridge over the streets? What do we want it to look like? All that kind of stuff. So I'll be connecting with everyone over the next 6-9 months as we figure all this out. Questions on this one?
I mentioned on the survey a while back about the Lucas Street district.
So this actually has already been redone.
As a pedestrian bridge or.
So with dedicated bicycle lanes and an expanded sidewalk,
Okay.
that happened during COVID, so if you missed it, don't forget.
Too steep for anybody in wheelchair or anything like that. Still, I think a more head oriented bridge was something a little bit.
So there has been a survey sent out regarding a bridge over Public Creek.
Yes, and I'm going to thank everybody who filled that one out. Also, because that bridge over Beverly Creek would be the single most expensive piece of this potential project, and it came in second of the options that CDOT offered. So they said they were trying to fund the top 3. So hopefully, not going to happen overnight, but that's really encouraging.
Yep, one of the big things for that one is where do we connect, the origin part to the boat launch. Which part are they going to do it on? Are the neighbors okay with that? How do we get around neighbors who be okay with that, or what do they want?
And that's one of the things that's really complicated about this project is while we are connecting parks, a lot of this is going to be on private property. And that sounds weird, but it's by design. So the way that the riverfront guidelines requires that any big development along the river includes a public path a certain setback, benches, lighting, all of that. So if you want to see an example of what the city thinks the whole thing should look like, the Amazon facility, this is Halsted, it's like right there. And all the stuff that's on the other side of that, that's what the city would like the entire thing to look like the whole way down. But the existing conditions aren't going to permit it everywhere. So you can see right here, a lot of demonstrating exactly how much space is available behind IDOT under the interstate.
Yeah, so I really want to challenge.
So there's challenges.
The good thing is that if anybody buys property along the riverfront and develops it, they automatically have to build a riverfront. So when the famous centers get torn down and he rebuilds, he's gonna have to build everyone, and that'll kind of get connected to the current one. So that's a good thing, right? If anybody decides to build anything, they automatically.
Is this, so I understand that if they do something, which is why we have the Amazon facility.
Yeah.
The existing owners can, I mean, is this just asking very nicely, or is there some way that they would be required? I mean, if they sold it ever, they would have to do it, somebody would have to do it, but like, is there any teeth in this for existing owners?
That's where we've got a good reading. So the reality is, ComEd is gonna be another good one where there is 10 feet of space there between a whole lot of barbed wire because they don't want anybody in their substation, which we understand that we don't want anybody in their substation either. But there is actually enough space. And so we may have to get creative about things like, okay, private owner, would you give us an easement if we go find the money to build it?
Right.
You know, and so we anticipate that there's going to be a lot of negotiations and a lot of getting creative. And in the case of ComEd particularly, it's so much bed press. They could just give us some of the money they were going to give Michael Madigan. But but you know, we're also being realistic here.
So that would be one of the problems, right, getting the dollars to do that. Halsted, right, that's Iron Mountain, and you can walk next to it and then get back to the other side of the river. But there's a railroad to the side of that and then Iron Mountain, so we have to figure out how to get across there, because we talked to the railroads, talk to anybody, Iron Mountain or the city.
But there's a railroad access road that we might be able to just pave and take over if CDOT helps us out. So this is, there's things, and so I want to be clear that like, we're gonna get there. Western Avenue Bridge is slated to be redone in the next 3 years. There's a golden opportunity there to get something that makes a lot more sense for anyone who's not a heavy vehicle. So we're trying.
How does the silo property play into that?
We actually, shortly after the sale of that property, got a letter of support from my team to do this. Now, that's not out of the kindness of his heart. He knows he's gonna have to build this if he wants to build anything on it, but on the other hand, you know, that recognition does matter. You know, and I would say we're really not pleased with how this has gone to Damon's Islands, but on the other hand, he picks up the phone and call now. It's better than we were before.
And like I said, when he builds anything, that's there's already guidelines for light, seating, lighting. With another. Another question.
All right. So a couple more things. Boy, this one traveled fast on the internet. I don't know anything about pickleball, and suddenly I had an inbox full of questions. So this screenshot, Chicago Park District put out through Impact and social media, and the tennis league filled our inbox very quickly, and I don't blame them. They were like, "Yes, please resurface our lots, but you're going to take them away." So to back up for a second, with some of the money coming into city coffers for specific purposes, they are planning to build 50 pickleball courts throughout the city. 10 of them are slated for McKinley Park. That's pretty cool, but they have to go somewhere. And so the tennis players were upset. I was personally a little less sympathetic than the people who were like, "Oh my God, it's going to be noisy." But the proposed compromise is that the slated pickleball courts will instead go onto the hard surface fenced areas over by the dog park, because it's easier to put kids playing soccer in the grass than it is to do something else for tennis players, and they didn't want to disturb it. And also, if people really are worried about noise, no one will ever notice next to 8 lanes of Western Avenue.
So
Yeah, so are they paving over the, let's see, courts?
That's possible. Sabrina, do you know any more?
No, I know that road in the western.
Yeah,
I mean, there are also tennis courts on Western,
yeah,
but they're far less built up than these all the time.
yeah. I will say I did thank you, Zach, for your 2 cents too, that by the way, there's this empty concrete pad that no one does anything with. I sent that up. Let's see.
We're not calling it all, like shut it down or like you can.
Yeah, I mean, we can literally see the empty concrete pad right there.
Yeah, yeah, it's sometimes
That's
used for barbecue. That's the only thing I've ever seen used for.
Used to be a handball court.
Oh, did it? Okay.
Nobody's done anything. Just,
We put
It's
a
a
couple
concrete.
right there, yeah.
yeah. There's room to put all. I mean, apparently 4 pickleball courts could fit there.
So,
I wouldn't want to see the footy courts go.
no, I wouldn't
Yeah.
either. I wouldn't
Yeah, because
either.
kids use those all
Kids
the
use them all
time.
the time.
Yeah.
If you want to weigh in on this one, the Park District budget meeting is happening right now. However, Impact is having a meeting, and I have the info at the end of our slides and the upcoming events, and you can go there and talk to them about it. And the 12th ward, I'm sure, is still taking comments. All right. And then last thing before we get to our guest speaker is the Wheatland 2 proposal. So this is not actually in McKinley Park. It is in the 12th ward. This is a little bit of a mind work. So it's turned sideways, and that like large street at the top of the large photo there is Western Avenue. Okay, so this is Western Avenue and the
That's
home,
Home Depot.
and this is the Home Depot, yeah. All right, so Wheatland Tube's been there for a long time. They're selling, moving on, and the proposal is to repurpose this into another logistics facility. So next slide, please. So there's 3 current buildings. The 2 in the back here would be expanded, redone, new traffic patterns. And yeah, no logistics.
That's what we need.
It's really all I've got to say about it. One of the things.
We need more now.
47th Street.
But you can smell that plastic from like blocks away.
Yeah, it's good, it's good to have neither. It's also an option.
But I mean, 47th Street is already a madhouse, and it's impossible to go down 47th Street, so they're gonna be coming up Western. And then Western is already crazy. They're like, there's putting that much, that's crazy. I've watched multiple trucks like hit people and other cars coming up 47th because there's not enough room to turn right.
So you wanna, yeah, come on, so that so we can get you on the speaker.
Parliament.
So we did talk to them about that, and so their update is that they rerouted the traffic so that it's gonna be on 43rd instead of 47th.
To go where?
You know.
To Western?
Yeah.
So they're gonna come out
They
on,
don't have a tenant, which is also a concern. They want it to be a distribution center, something similar to
Yeah,
an
they wanna
Amazon.
put another Amazon.
So if you're interested, we're gonna have a meeting on October 3rd where you can comment. The 12th board has a new zoning process, where MPDC is part of that process, so based on the community need, MPDC will submit a recommendation, BPNC will submit a recommendation, and for EJ will submit a recommendation. We will take that into consideration, and
Is the whole lot in 15, 12, or both?
it's in 12.
Okay, nice.
Yeah,
Good.
but it is.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that was, I didn't mention the zoning process because that's gonna be a topic of conversation at our board meeting next week.
I think.
But I feel a little bit weird about weighing on this one because it's not in McKinley Park. It certainly will affect us, so it's okay to say that. But we also want to put out the webs and make sure that neighbors from back of the yards actually know that this is going on and get them out because they have not had a community group step up to represent them. And that's just not right. So if anybody that you guys know who is in position to help fill that gap, they deserve to have representation in this.
Yeah, they did have a community meeting in the spring. Headed by YNC, but I think like 5 people attended, so whatever they call that.
Fantastic.
Is it, so what they're proposing, I think I read it a little bit, but is what they're proposing like in line with how it's zoned?
No, so we would they would need to get it rezoned, which is part of why they have to go for zoning process.
Have they stated when this process will be? Because I don't know if Wheatland has already sold the building.
So they already sold to Brookfield Properties.
Okay.
They are saying that they'll be out in 2 to 3 years. But they haven't given us, it is not.
It's a lot of skilled labor.
And they've got some people until the summer. Yeah, but that was happening. So
That's a lot of skilled labor and
they already closed 2 of the buildings. I think only 1 of them is currently in use.
yeah, probably the building one area.
All right, there is gonna be a public meeting on this on October 3rd. We're gonna get you all the information at the end. I do want to make sure that we have time for our guest speaker before the library kicks us out, because they do run a pretty tight ship around here. So with that, give me a second, I'll get your deck up. Go ahead and introduce yourself while I'm pulling out here.
Yeah, so, my name is Nick Wesley. I'm, Executive Director at Urban Rivers, and, we're doing floating parks in the Chicago River. So I'll talk about, we'll bounce around a little bit, and then probably skip through some other stuff, and we can get into more conversation. Yeah, so so basically, yeah, Urban Rivers, we have built a couple different floating parks in a couple different places. And I'll kind of go through why, what they are and things like that. If you want to go to the next slide. So essentially, I'll start with just the standard condition of most of our urban rivers. They're basically engineered for a few simple purposes, mostly to move goods back and forth. And the second thing is for removing waste from a city in Chicago's case. A lot of others. So, we copy in Chicago specifically, we did some very interesting things of reversing the entire Chicago River. So we built the giant channel that eventually connects to the Mississippi through a couple of other waterways, which then caused the river, instead of flowing into the lake, to then flow to St. Louis and the Gulf of Mexico. And and that was our solution to, the public health problem of what happens when you dump your sewage in your drinking water. So we fixed that for us. Sorry, St. Louis. But, if you want to go back through, and so we did that. So that was like one of the big kind of things that made Chicago exist and made it work, made it grow, I guess. And the other thing we tried to do is build, make it good for moving goods back and forth. Now that we have this connection to Mississippi and connection to the Great Lakes, which eventually went to the East Coast, and so we really focused on widening the rivers, straightening them, dredging them, so removing them, making them deeper, particularly so we can get lake freighters and other giant boats and barges in. And in that process, we removed, basically most of the existing habitat and ecological infrastructure that, had really been there for quite some time. And so you can see in that previous slide, they had the, this is showing right by 78, the amount of effort that was put into just making it a little straighter. And then that's kind of what the river looked like. You have a ton of different boat traffic. So it made sense at the time. We didn't have highways. This was the main way that people moved things around. And so that was the flavor of the day. Like since then, that use is waned. You go to the next slide. Perfect. And now we basically end up with something like this. This is a pretty typical situation in the river where you have these sheet pile walls. You don't get nearly the same amount of boat traffic, a fraction of what was previous there. And it really kind of leaves it in this state. And so, kind of our thought is how can we take this existing infrastructure and turn it into something that is more beneficial for both the people and the wildlife area. So turning something like that into something like this. And so these are some of the gardens we installed in 2017. I'll go a little more into that later. So yeah, basically, we did some research programs, seeing how this would work, tried to find a way to try to see if people would take this idea and kind of expand it and build these types of systems. Eventually, we did a Kickstarter and then, built the first section, which is what you saw in the previous thing. It's like a 160-foot long pilot, yep. And then kind of have been building on that ever since. In 2018, we started doing a framework plan for Wild Mile as a whole. So the concept on the inside of Goose Island, turning that into basically a large linear floating park. In 2021, we were able to actually put in the first section of it, opened up in 2022, and then had been adding on more and more concepts to this, including the Bubbly Creek installation. So that was, which I'll go into in a little bit, and then, we're doing the expand Wild Mile, adding more gardens to places. Basically, the way that these systems work, we have these floating garden mats. We put all sorts of native plants in it. The plants actually grow through these units, and the roots hanging into the water, which provide a lot of fish habitat and a lot of surface area for microbes and other things to grow. They also have they provide habitat on top for birds, insects, other wildlife, really kind of emulate the function of a natural river ecosystem or natural river edge in areas where you really can't do this type of, where you can't build a natural edge, different limitations. So all of the gardens and all the kind of foundation of it is that, it's installed by the community. Everything we put in is bolted together, planted, put in the water by volunteers and other people in the community, school groups in different cases. So, it's one of those things that, one of my favorite things about it is that it's like public park that is physically built by, the people who use it. And so, they're really expandable and, you plant them, they look like this. And then pretty quickly after, they'll end up looking like this. So they grow and we use a lot of that excess nutrients from the river as fertilizer, and they develop into these really interesting ecosystems that kind of revitalize the place. And so some of the pillars of what we work on, so we have research programs that we collaborate with other research institutions, as well as doing some of our own to figure out, really we want to know how these actually work in a nervous system. So there's not as much data as there really needs to be to make sure that what is happening is ecologically beneficial, and in what ways is it, and how can we, apply that and use that to fix some of the problems. And so doing things such as fish studies, muscle research, other things like that. Obviously recreation, they're beautiful and fun, and they increase opportunities for access and all sorts of other different things. Yeah, and then I'll just keep going. And then education and things like that. We have partner schools do tons of field trips and have students actually do research projects where things exist on the parks because of it. So it's Wild Mile. So it's on this east side of Goose Island. Is the location. Go to the next slide. We have a lot of different partners. It's one of those things that the river is a public trust, and the only way to get anything like this done is really with a lot of different people, like a lot of different routes. So it's fun and it's great. Go to the next one. Yeah, and so this is a photo of the Wild Mile. And so this is the first section of floating walkway that was installed. It's really, it's the first park of its type in the world, at least that I've ever been able to find, and if anybody has to do exams.
What neighborhood is that?
So
What neighborhood is that?
this is in Lincoln Park. Yeah, so it's on the east side of Goose Island. And one of the interesting things on this, and one of the big challenges that I think you guys are facing with the building the connection between them is a lot of the jurisdictions around connecting things and around putting things specifically in water. And so the east side of Goose Island, all the rivers are controlled by the Army Corps. East side of Goose Island is also, but the west side is where there are barge operators. There's Zinga that still uses that side. This side, they sealed the bridges and it's too shallow. It's like 5 to 8 feet. So it made it a perfect place where we were able to get something put through that's permanent in a navigable waterway, because it wasn't actually navigable. It's still definitely recognized as navigable. So, yeah.
Just for frame of reference, could you point to the following items so people know where we're at? REI,
Yeah, that's REI
Off Color Brewing,
right here.
and Waste Management. Just to give you an idea of where we're at, for those of you who needed some landmarks, you
Yeah.
walk off the kayak dock at REI to get down here.
Yeah. And so here's a couple more pictures of people using it. And just the system, the way that it works, it's all anchored to the bottom. In this case, we use concrete blocks and then these chains, elastic bands to kind of connect this through, and then we attach the floating gardens along the edge there, and really creates a pretty cool immersive experience. I like a lot. We
Oh,
yeah, so we do, and actually a lot of volunteers as well. So it's we do a lot of weeding, upkeep, trash pickup, whatnot, fixing things. It's there's different ways to approach it too. We do, I don't want to say heavily manicured, but there's a lot of intervention in making sure that these plants work, and we use a lot of species that we're not sure if they will work, so figuring out how to do that. But in other areas, there's different ways to do it where you can more or less, you can do a lot less. But yeah, and then so phase 2, so we're gonna keep expanding, and going north, and eventually the whole goal of the Wild Mile is to connect that mile-long stretch on the east side of Goose Island, all the way from North Avenue down to basically Chicago Avenue, and create public access on one side, and then the other side is more natural access, so where you can have floating gardens and things like that without people around, and create that cool ecosystem. And some of the benefits we've seen, I think 104 bird species spotted, regularly see things like beavers and other stuff on the gardens while people are around. It's pretty fun place in that regard. So yeah, Buckley Creek. So it was a collaboration between us and Chattaquoya. Basically, Buckley Creek, as you guys probably know, is one of the most notoriously polluted areas of the river, and it was really interesting to be able to take some of these floating gardens and create something that would function ecologically in an area that just historically, has a pretty bad reputation. But I think unwarranted at this point in some ways, not always, but in some ways. So, we put in 6 of these islands, and really are trying to experiment and see how they're going to work, how the anchoring works in a kind of a freestanding area, what different plant species, how they interact, and how we can actually activate and program these areas to make it so that it's not just this little green blob, in the distance. It's something that people are actually able to interact with and kind of become a part of. So we have a lot of volunteers who go there and do different things, such as, weeding, cleanups, and then we started a free community kayak program. So every Monday night, from like 4 to 7, anybody can show up, get in the kayak, go out, check out the gardens, tour around, hang out. And that's been a really interesting way to bring people down, to have them active in the river, and to expose them to kind of some of this water-based recreation without any, barrier to entry of having to either buy a kayak or rent a kayak. Yeah.
Anything in particular about the South Branch of the river? A lot of this stuff doesn't get developed.
I'm sorry, there's one more sentence. Oh, but is there anything like ecologically particular about the southwest side of our river? Is there more traffic? Are there actually barriers?
Oh, I will, yeah, oh, yeah. So the biggest barrier, or the biggest hurdle that it took us to overcome was the Army Corps, being able to get a permit for this type of stuff. So
That wasn't an issue on the north.
on the east side of Goose Island, because it's the only piece of the river that has an alternate route. And so that was what made it work for the initial, like this, basically getting that through, like even here, the initial goal of this is to have it in the turning basin. That's like what would be the best spot. But we're still dealing with the Army Corps to get the permit to put it there, which was the initial goal. So this is like 2 years after, sorry, so it's that's like the biggest thing, I think, but the other thing, an interesting thing, so on funding of the first project, so that was funded through up in in Lincoln Park, that's funded through open space impact fees, which are basically a tax on tall buildings. And everywhere in the city has them, but they're set up in geographic areas. This area is from the river to the lake, North Avenue to the river down south, which makes it.
The allocation of the funds isn't. geographic.
Yeah, it's meant for.
Revenue's raised forever.
It's wherever a building's built,
Yeah.
it's to, when it's over a certain floor area ratio, to go into building or buying new open space in that area. So that's like what it is. So in that area in particular, it's extremely expensive to buy land to do parks, do things like that. There's a lot of development and it makes it, but there's not enough in the offers to actually buy a lot. So that's one of the things that enabled that piece. But frankly, like the permitting was like, when we started, that was like, oh yeah, this makes the most sense. So, yeah.
Appreciate it.
But
I'm really excited about this because when I did a Friends of Chicago River cleanup day, I was looking, I was like, who's doing that? Who did this? These are awesome. And I'm like, this is awesome. I want to go see it. So, but like, nobody uses Bubbly Creek for actual boats anymore, like for transportation, do they? Like, it's not an access to anything.
not really, no.
Took Mike
Yeah.
We took Mike and I out there, just like, we didn't.
Oh, no, it's gross. But, like I said, I go out and clean it up.
Yeah.
So, but like that would allow for a lot of this to happen because they would be a huge, because at this point, like Bubbly Creek, even after they finish the next cistern, like Bubbly Creek is still gonna get literal shit in it every once in a while because of the way that rains go. And we need something to be able to like clean our river better.
Yeah, yeah.
This is amazing.
I think it's totally right to do something like this, like in a lot of areas throughout the whole thing.
I mean, nobody's gonna be swimming in there for a while, but at least it would be like less smelly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, no, I think there's a ton of opportunity.
Yeah.
It's right now, in most of our rivers, they're unused for the most part. Like, there's not like a big amount of people that can access it. There's nothing so they just kind of sit there. And this is where I think creating more opportunities like, Wild Mile and other things like that, and emulating and adapting and enhancing could create cool areas that people can use. Yeah, so the other areas that I think are really interesting, the slips, these are, figures into neighborhoods where they're completely unutilized in most cases, and can become something that is a real asset for the communities there, and to create some of the only places that you can actually access the river. And I think they're really interesting spots and could be really cool.
Are they not used at all?
Some have barges that, like, I think their Prairie has a barge that they load on it, but most of them, like in this one right there, has not. Like, there's,
Where is that?
this one.
Right, like Benito Juarez.
That other.
That's Juarez right there.
Yeah, there's Benito Juarez.
That's
There's
Yeah.
the ranch of Bubbly Creek.
So
right
it's
there.
two more west
You can
where
see
CDOT's
from
leaving their
above.
seized property in the slips?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, that's.
The tower
that's-
on that
that's-
country and so the budget artists. Really, you don't have access to that.
Oh, that's wild. I didn't realize they was.
Ownership behind it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's there, and it's really thinking about for the whole river, like, how can you, like, there's so much potential to build it in a way that, can connect communities, can enhance the ecological function of the river. This is a photo of one of the slips facing towards the channel, and so, yeah, I just wanted to talk a little bit about Public Creek and some of the other things, just kind of open it up as a concept. Yeah.
The kayaks, the program is at the boathouse on Ashland, is that where that is?
It's sort of, yes, it is, but it's not at the boathouse. We bring our boats to, yes, so Parks 571, yeah.
Okay.
So we bring our boats there and then launch from the park.
And you'll still be doing that for little bit longer.
A little bit longer, yeah, until it gets too cold.
It's
Nice.
popular. Yeah, I tried to go and it was sold out.
Really?
Yeah,
Yeah, it
So-
feels,
I went home and got my own boat. I don't want down there. But
What time do you need to get there to get it?
well, I don't know, it depends on the day, so you can pre-order tickets.
Can you?
We have like an Eventbrite, so we have like, I think, I don't know, it's like half or less that people could reserve, and then the rest are, you know, you just show up and sign up, so it's both of them, so you can.
I also want to point out geographically, if you just want to see the islands, you can walk down to the opposite edge from what's in that picture.
Yeah.
From Ashland, yeah,
From Ash.
from Ashland, yeah, you can walk right down and touch them right there, yeah, so I would certainly encourage you to check that out too. There's another island in Bridgeport too, behind the Amazon facility,
Yeah,
at Holstead and Archer.
there's, on
They have
that,
interpretive signs on that one.
what?
You've got interpretive signage
We got
up for
interpretive
those.
signs on that one.
Yeah.
On that one, if you go at night, like 8 or so, every single time I've gone, there's been 1 to 2 beavers hanging out on it. So if you walk quietly and don't bring your dog, that will bark immediately. You can enjoy that. You do bring your dog, they leave. But, yeah,
What sort of monitoring data do you have or have access to, in like insect birds, fish, amphibians, reptiles? That, do you have any of that stuff? Are you getting that stuff?
yeah, so there's a couple different things we've done. So we do some spot counts of birds, although it's not, I wouldn't say it's complete. We did, the shed is setting up actually, it was in the trip today, which is kind of cool, but they have acoustic telemetry tracking for fish, so it's just basically a little speaker that they inject in the fish, and then they put microphones,
I'm familiar.
and then, you know, yeah. And so,
You're the only one who was familiar
I
with
just
this.
lost the button.
Well, usually for the fishes on purpose.
And what is your success criteria? How do you know it's successful? Are you, does, are you taking MWRD data that says there's no fish here and saying, oh, there's no fish here and do a metric, or just like, here you go?
yeah, there's a bunch of different ways to figure it out, I guess, so it depends on, for me, like personally, like Nick, that it's like growing and developing, that's like kind of that's what I look at, but I know we have a head of our research who is much different standard than I do, but in essence, like one of the things that's interesting about it is, see, we had a fish that was tagged outside the wild mile that was found about 35 miles up in Skokie.
Yeah.
So like something like that, where you know these things are moving between, that's interesting to know that they're hanging out there. We're seeing a lot more aquatic plants that are growing around it from, you know, our sonar scans, so that's interesting. Seeing how the plant survives another piece, like are we getting a lot of, is everything dying right away? Are we getting a lot of recurring growth and stuff like that? How are the insects doing? So yeah, so there's a couple different ways to frame it. But I think it's working out.
Okay.
But I think there's always more, we did some water quality stuff, so we checked out between the beginning, middle, and end of the gardens. And we're able to see, I think it was about 6% decrease in nitrates from the beginning to the end, which shows that there's nutrient uptake. Also interesting that happened year round, which shows that there may be microbes, things like that, in the roots that are doing a lot of this digesting these things. So there's, some of those are some kind of more solid metrics that continue these days. Yeah.
So does that, what's the buffer zone of that change? If you go up 2 feet, 10 feet, 20 feet?
It's 160 foot long, so it's boom, boom.
Right, but
Yeah.
like, you're changing.
Oh, how far does that
Yes, I'm
extend out?
sorry,
Oh, I, you know, I don't know yet. We're still collecting data, so hopefully that's in the freezer.
Maybe if you volunteer for the videos later. It's out there in the summer, and shock those things, and it was, I got a lot of fish off there. Cool.
Yeah. Yeah. It's probably the best thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome.
We'll be out there in 2 weeks. Hopefully, do this one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's our course of control.
Unless you realize they're dying. Just tasing it.
Um,
The library is usually starts to kick us out at a quarter till. So I'm gonna run through this real quick and then. Yep, see? All right, so I'm gonna run through our last two slides and then let you guys take Nick out for beer and continue to pick his brain. Because everybody should do that.
Thanks, Amy.
Yeah.
Thank you. And for real, as a pleasure. Thank you so much. It's great to have that kind of engagement. So, yep. Okay, so two last things here on ours. Every fall, we do our recruiting for more people to be involved with the Development Council, and this year will be no different. The board is having a retreat this weekend to kind of figure out how we're going to do it this year. So we'll get you more information as we have it, but just want to let you know that we are looking for more people to join the board and also for people who might be volunteers with us. The commitments are different. Board members are expected to attend this meeting and a board meeting every month, and then there's additional stuff that gets done in between. It ends up being a couple hours a week for most of our board members to make all of these things happen. And to be a member of the board, you must live or work in McKinley Park. To volunteer for us, we just, want to know that you like McKinley Park and you're familiar with the area. And the volunteer commitment is usually for a specific task. So we want to have a group of people that we can call on for specific things. And that would be things like perhaps canvassing in advance of special events and door knocking. We especially want to have more bilingual volunteers, both as board members and in our general volunteer pool. So if you have that skill set, we especially want to talk to you. No experience is required for either group. Sometimes if you're like, yeah, you guys are all urban planners or this, that, no, none of us came fully formed. We'll make sure that you get the opportunity to be in the room where these things happen so you can learn too. And we don't expect, what we expect is for people to show up on time and follow instructions and ask a lot of questions. That's what we expect. So if you're interested in either of those opportunities with MPDC, please let us know, and we'll be making the call again as the fall continues. And then finally, upcoming events. So next two events that you might want to know about are going to be the public meeting regarding the Wheatland Tube development that we just discussed. Please take a picture of this slide. Don't be shy. And that is going to be on Tuesday the 3rd at Brighton Park Community Campus. That's the new Park District Center, right? Okay. In the club room. And also for people who are concerned or interested in the pickleball courts, the McKinley Park Advisory Committee will be addressing that subject on October 10th at their meeting at the field. Our next public meeting will be on Wednesday, October 18th in this room, and our guest speaker is going to be Epstein, who is the designer for the new development on Pershing. So you'll have the opportunity to ask them all the questions they may or may not be able to answer yet, but they will be here. Great. So with that, thank you. Please make your exit, but feel free to loiter outside so that the library staff can go home. Yes. Correct. No, we're talking about Wheatland too. Because that's in back of the yards, it's between 43rd and 47th. But the meeting is at the park. Facility. Yeah, did everybody get that before we? Don't be shy. Cool.